Shalom, and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of a Shabbat teaching with Rabbi Adam Kligfeld and Rabbi Hannah Jensen.
For those of you who don't know me, I'm Rabbi Hannah Jensen. I'm one of the rabbis at IKAR, and really thrilled to be with you all this afternoon and get to do some learning together. And I think Tyson really laid out for us very clearly why this work feels so important in this moment, maybe more than it has for many of us in our lifetimes. And we are going to look today at a couple things. I'm going to teach for a bit, and then Rabbi Kligfeld's going to teach for a bit, so you'll kind of get some different aspects of this learning and this work. And so I want to start, before I even hand out my very mini source sheet, I want to start with the conversation about language. That's what I'm going to do my learning on tonight, is just about different language that's used in our tradition and also language that we're using in our modern world. So the two words that we're going to look at today are stranger and guest. And I first want to just ask you, we're going to start with stranger. When you hear the word stranger, what comes up for you? What are the first things you think of? How would you describe it? You can raise a hand, shout out a word, define it, whatever you want. Yes. Stranger danger. Great. I don't think you're alone in that. What else? Yes. Foreigner. Okay. So a very distant relative that we can almost not really track how long ago it was. Okay. Other thoughts? Yeah. Unknown. Great. Yes. Strange. Mm-hmm. Other thoughts? Yeah. Great. We were once strangers in Egypt. That, I think, is very familiar to all of us in this room. Thank you for bringing that here. Yes. Yeah. Someone who's estranged from you. Beautiful. Other thoughts about stranger? What's a feeling you get when you hear the word stranger? Yeah, in the back. Threat. Yep. Thank you. Other. Great. Apprehensive. Fear. Curiosity. Love that. Other thoughts? Yeah, please. Beautiful. A stranger is a friend you haven't met yet. I'm gonna come back to you again at the end, and we're gonna have you close with that. So remember that. Don't forget that. Okay, we're coming back to you. Brian, right? Okay, we're coming back to you. Okay. What about guest? First, let's define guest, or what are the things that you think of with guest, and then we'll go back to feeling. So let's go back to, invitation. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Welcomed. Breaking bread. Hospitality. Great. Potential relationship. Beautiful. Expected. Mm-hmm. Unexpected. Two things can be true. Yes. Temporary. Great. We're going to be looking at that word shortly, so thank you for setting us up well for that. Appreciate it. Okay, feeling. When you hear guest, feeling that you get. Yes. Great. Hierarchical. Some kind of hierarchy, one way or the other. Yeah. Expectation. Mm-hmm. Say that again. Party. Exactly. Great. Any other thoughts on either stranger or guest? Anticipation. Temporary. Mm-hmm. Great. So we're going to look today at just two texts from our tradition. One about the stranger, and one about guests. And we're going to think together a little bit about how different these two ideas really are, and how much our language actually changes the way that we see these things. I'm going to pass these down, and we'll start on the side that has stranger bold. And as my colleague, Rabbi Ronit Sadok, would always say, as soon as these texts are in your hand, they're as much yours as anyone else's. Whether you've ever seen Hebrew before or not, we are better for hearing your voices. So don't think that your voice doesn't belong in this room. So the first thing we're going to look at comes from Mishnah Torah. I know you don't all have them yet, but I'm just going to set it up as they're being passed out. There should be enough, but If there aren't, maybe we can share. And we're going to look at this. Someone mentioned we were strangers, right? We were strangers in the land of Egypt. I think we're told so many times in the Torah, love the stranger because you were the stranger. And we know that we're told that, but it's not always clear maybe why. We're going to look at one of the explanations of why, or at least the one that Rambam gives us here, about why it is that we love the stranger and what that means. So maybe, can someone read this for us, starting from the love of the stranger? I may interrupt you along the way. Okay. Rabbi Schatz says I should just do it because you will need the microphone. Thank you. Okay. The love of the stranger who has entered beneath the wings of the divine presence is prescribed by two biblical commandments. One, because they are considered to be within the category of a friend, and one, because they are a stranger, and the Torah states, you shall love the stranger. The Holy One commanded that we should love the stranger just as God commanded that we should love the divine. As it is written, you shall love Adonai your God. The Holy One, God's self, loves the stranger, as it is written, and God loves the stranger. Okay, can someone point out what's the first category? What's the first reason that love of the stranger is so connected to divinity? What's the first reason? Just yell it out. Because the stranger is a friend, is put in the category of friend. What do we make of that? Anyone surprised by that? Unsurprised? Thrilled? Angry? What do you make of that? Please. A friend to be made. It's like Brian said earlier, a stranger is a friend you haven't met yet. Great.
Making a good impression.
Making a good impression. Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Beautiful. So it may be that the stranger has some kind of wisdom or message for you that you weren't expecting and you just don't know yet. Beautiful. And what about the second category? Loving the stranger has something to do with loving God, because God loves the stranger. What do we make of that? Someone help parse that out for us a little bit. Yeah.
We're supposed to imitate God, so we will imitate God's love of strangers.
Great. God loves a stranger, and if we are imitating God, that's one of the ways that we do that. Beautiful. Yes.
There's something about loving the stranger because you were a stranger.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. Loving the stranger because we were a stranger. Yeah. Yeah. What you give out into the world may come back to also benefit you in some way. Yeah. What do you make? Does anyone struggle with the idea that loving the stranger is connected with loving God? Does anyone feel like, I don't know about that? Yeah. Okay. And how would, not to put you on the spot, but what would it look like to, what? Okay. I'm just curious if you could say a little more about what does it look like then to decide which strangers to love or not? Okay. Just thought I'd ask. Yeah. I love that. There's an openness to the stranger, maybe, that could lead to some kind of relationship that could lead to loving the stranger, but maybe it doesn't have to start there, but it starts with some openness, some hearing, some listening, some posturing that's a little bit different, maybe.
When you're a stranger and you're being listened to, you kind of love the person who's listening.
Yeah, so maybe there's a reciprocal love, or maybe the love starts one direction, a different direction. Yeah. One more thought on this. Yeah, Tom. Right, yeah. And it's not always clear how to know what those lines are. Okay, we're going to turn to guest, not to friend, to guest. So let's flip our pages over. We're going to look for a second at, so that's one of the ways that our tradition thinks about strangers is that they have the possibility of being a friend and that it's connected somehow to loving God. God loves the stranger and we love the stranger, but it's sort of connected to our love for the divine also, that those things are not necessarily separable. And now we're going to see if it feels how different the tradition is about guests. And spoiler alert, it may not be that different. So we're going to look at this piece of Talmud from Bavli Shabbat, and it goes as follows. And I'll stop along the way because there are kind of a few pieces. Rabbi Yochanan said, hospitality to guests is as great as early attendance at the house of study, which was understood to be one of the primary obligations and things that you could do to receive glory in this world and the world to come. There are 6 things, the fruit of which humans eat in this world, while the principle remains for them in the world to come. We see this list, variations of this list many times, but here's one of them. And in this list, we have welcoming guests, visiting the sick, meditation in prayer, early attendance for study, rearing one's children to the study of Torah, and judging one's neighbor in the scale of merit. And then the conversation goes on, and Rav Yehuda said that Rav said, hospitality towards guests is actually greater than receiving the divine presence, because when Abraham welcomed his guests, which someone mentioned earlier, he says to God, God, if now I have found favor in your sight, do not pass by your servant. Do not pass me by. Abraham requested that God, the divine presence, wait for him, Abraham, while he tended to his guests appropriately. Whoa, exactly. Sometimes the text just speaks for itself. Abraham says to God, wait. I have something else to do first. I'll get back to you when I'm ready. What do we learn from that? What do we think? Yeah, please. Beautiful. So there's something tangible about the need that was in front of Abraham, that he thought God's needs can be put on the back burner for a second because these things in front of me are timely and it's a little bit different. That there's something corporeal about it that feels like it advantages that over the relationship with God in that moment. Other thoughts about it? Yeah. Right. When you have a competition of values, what do you choose? Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. Beautiful. And there is some understanding in some way that then that could be said of every stranger, right? Because all of us are created b'tselem Elohim. Then any interaction with any human being actually offers you an opportunity to engage with godliness or engage with divinity in the world. Because you have a spark of the divine, and so do you, and so do you, and so do you. And so does every person who we've encountered who we don't know. But to the point that few people have made, sometimes we don't trust those encounters. Sometimes we don't know who those people are going to be. Though you could say the same about some of the people who are guests in your life, that we might put in that category, that sometimes those people surprise us too, for better or for worse. Other thoughts about this? Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Anyone we haven't heard from yet? Great. Would love to hear some new voices. Great. Love that you brought that up. That if anyone is going to understand my decision to take care of these strangers in front of me, it's God. And so if there were ever a moment to make sure that I was honoring that part of what has been asked of me, it's now, and God will understand. And not only understand, but sort of encourage the decision that I'm making. Yeah. Any other voices we haven't heard from yet? And then happy to hear from people we've heard from. To God, no one is strange. No one is a stranger. Right. And so, right. God is the common denominator. And so we may not always know, but God has a relationship with all of these beings in some way. Beautiful. Yeah. Like if you're going to give us this obligation, you got to let us do it. Stay out of our way for a second. Let it happen. Yeah, absolutely. Other thoughts about this? Other thoughts about what are the differences that we're seeing or similarities we're seeing between stranger and guest and how we are obligated to them and the ways that we treat them? Anyone want to help us understand some difference or some similarity in what we've seen? Yeah. Great. So that when we are in front of a stranger or a guest, both really ask us to do the same thing, which is engage with them in a certain way, meet them, welcome them, understand them, listen to them, and that the categories have different names, but actually the things that we're asked to do for them are not that different. Great. Yes. Right. That in some ways it's much easier said than done, and easier to talk the talk than to walk the walk of acting in the world as though you're engaging with every stranger, as though they're a spark of the divine, as though they're a guest, as though you're welcoming them in the same way that you would a guest. Any stranger. Yeah, and that maybe goes back to the beginning when one of the first thing anyone said was stranger danger, right? That there are so many ways in which we've been sort of taught or told over much time that these categories are different. And that's, yeah, please. Right. We've created these categories. We've separated people into this or this or this. And God is saying, hold on a second. Let's step back and remember that actually all of us are in one category. And that category is humanity. And how do we engage with people in a different way? And to the question of, how hard it is to engage in the world with strangers and see them as potential friends or guests, I think that's really one of the hardest things that we face right now also in the world. And I want to close with just a few thoughts before I turn it over to Rabbi Kligfeld. But I think we could continue this conversation for 4 more hours. There's so much more to say just in these 2 tiny texts of our tradition, and we know that there are hundreds more like these. I think that there's an emotional distance and an emotional difference that's created in labeling people. When we call people a guest or a friend or an invitation or whatever the language is, it feels different to us. Whether or not the people are different or the situation is different, it feels different. We carry it differently. And when we label someone a stranger or an other or an unknown or a threat or anything like that, it feels different, even if actually they're not that different. And what we see in both of these texts is that our ancestors and our sages understood that both of these obligations to the stranger and to the guest rise to the level of, if not surpass, the level of relationship with God. That's how sacred these obligations are in our tradition. That's the strongest language that our sages knew how to use. That's the strongest encouragement they could give us for the way that we could be in the world. I think that right now we're seeing in our country and in the world more broadly a lot of language being used that really creates fear in us in lots of ways, creates separation between people, between groups of people, between different identity people, between different faiths, between different races, ethnicities, backgrounds, and that one of the things that we have to remember is that we actually are all the same, that any stranger actually has the possibility of an opportunity to become a guest or a friend or a neighbor. And that's one of the things that our 2 communities have done together. As Tyson said earlier, our two communities worked last year to resettle a Ukrainian family. And we took these people who we could have very easily seen as strangers. We could have very easily put in the category of other, of stranger danger, of something unknown, and unknown not in a good way. And instead we brought them here and we bridged that gap and moved them from the category of stranger to the category of guest, neighbor, and friend. And what I want to just invite us all into tonight is that it isn't easy. It's much easier to sit here and have these conversations than it is to go out in the world and extend that kind of trust to someone you don't know, especially in this moment, especially when we know that we're all carrying a lot of fears for very valid reasons. And I want to just remind us on this Refugee Shabbat that there actually is a different way to be in the world. I am really grateful that tonight we got to have our 2 communities here together and separate and end that kind of separation and just be together in one room as one Jewish community, as one people really working to remember these obligations of our tradition. And I just hope that we all can go out into the world and maybe think a little bit differently about the people we might generally categorize as strangers, and see how not only just in the way that our life changes, but in the way that our emotional experience changes of orienting ourselves to the world, as though maybe there's a little bit more opportunity for a stranger to become a guest. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Yasher Koach, Rabbi Jensen. I'm going to pass out more source sheets. There are about 4 for every 5 people. So if you have a slide rule, you can figure out how many should be at your general area. As they're going around, I want to just add one sentence to Tyson's introduction, because in his usual humility, he shined light on everyone who was worthy of the efforts that this community, at least, have been focusing on for many years towards this topic, except for himself. And no one in our midst has done more to orient and attune our consciousness to these issues through the prism of the Jewish tradition than Tyson has. So Yasher Koach to you, Tyson, for your focus and energy. And I also want to announce, in solidarity with Hayas, Temple Beth Am will now only be known as TBA. We're not, that's all it is going to be. We're not going to be breaking it down into its comportant names, just TBA. Okay. Does everybody have? There's no more temple in Temple Beth Am. Okay, this morning was Parshat Truma. And as we heard, as Marshall Lane, we're already in next week's Parsha, but sometimes it's nice and sometimes it's relevant to linger on the Parsha. And I want to look at one word and how its translation and transformation over centuries can help us have a different understanding of what our obligations are to the other. So we begin with the beginning of Parshat Truma, source 1. Daber b'nei Yisrael, speak to the children of Israel. V'chuli truma, they will take from me a truma. In the English, I used 3 or 4 of the many, many different English words that could be used as a translation for truma, depending on the different translations you look at. So over there on the left, you have, I think, Everett Fox and JPS, and maybe the third one. I forgot which one I quoted from. It could be a gift. It could be an offering. It could be, this is Everett Fox's hyphenated, a raised contribution. Something that the Israelites are giving to help build the Mishkan in the desert. Me'ed kol ish asher yudvenu libo, from every person whose heart moves that person. Tikhu at trumati, then you should take my truma, however we're going to define it. Rashi, who's one of the first people we look to try to understand what a word might have meant, does not mean he was right, but he is kind of a anchor for our exploration. He defines truma as hafrasha. Hafrasha means what? A separation. Lahafrish chala means to separate the little piece of challah if you have prepared enough dough and you pull it off to the side and you burn it, zecher lechurban and zecher lekohanim. Right. So, what's a perush? Why is a commentary called a perush? What's the connection between that root parash and a commentary? How to separate makes sense there. Parsing out the words, that was an interesting play on the syllables, right? You're separating meaning, right? You're saying that it might mean this, and it might mean that, and it might mean something else. So Rashi says what's going on here is that we're being asked to separate some of our funds, some of the things that are important to us, and give it over so that as if it no longer belongs to us. Hafrasha, yafrishu li, they should separate for me, mi mamonam, from their money, from their financial ability, nedava, a free will gift. And Rashi is almost certainly influenced in this translation by Onkelos. Onkelos lived about 1,000 years before Rashi. Onkelos is the translation of the Torah into the Aramaic that was the lingua franca of the Jews of the 1st century CE. And it's the oldest extant translation of the Torah into a language that we can make sense of. Once again, does not mean that Onkelos' translation is accurate, but it's a window into how the Jews of the rabbinic era understood the words in their vernacular, which was not Hebrew, it was Aramaic. And sometimes you can see connections. Malel im b'nei Yisrael. The Aramaic malel is for daber, but you hear in the word malel milah, word, right? So that's the word, Hebrew word milah is from the same root. Speak to the children of Israel, v'yafreshun. So that is the Aramaic form of yafrishu. They will separate kedamai, in front of me, afrashuta, some kind of a separation. So he's translating truma as afrashuta, something that is separated out. Okay, that's one possibility. And there are many others. But turn the page for a fascinating linguistic discussion that leads to a really important insight in terms of how we think about giving and what might motivate us to be generous. Rabbi Eli Ofran, an Israeli rabbi, and he has a wonderful collection of short divrei Torah called Drushim. It's pretty digestible with rudimentary Hebrew. I don't know if it's been translated into English. This is my translation on the left-hand side. But if you know a little bit of Hebrew and you want short bursts of divrei Torah, I would suggest looking out for it. Af shebeparashat hashuvah nikrat truma. Even though the parsha is called truma, if you know a little bit about Hebrew and you look at the word truma, what is the three-letter root you would guess would be the root of that word? Terem, taf, resh, mem. That would be your first guess, right? Because that's how it's formed. And the vav and the hey would be creating the noun. But you'd think it's taf, resh, mem from the verb litrom. And what does litrom mean in modern Hebrew? To donate. Right? Litrom means to donate, so it would make sense, particularly if you're working backwards. I know this modern Hebrew word litrom. This is a word truma that has the same consonants. The context in this verse is that the Israelites are being asked to donate something. It must be that that's what it means. It must be a donation. It's as if we should say back to the translators, you mistranslated, it's not a separation, it's not an offering, it's a donation. Look what Rabbi Ofran says. B'tanach kulo, in the entire Bible, not just the Torah, lo matsui hapoel taram aflo pamachat. There is no reference in the entire Bible of a verb whose root is taf resh mem, the very verb that we know of in modern Hebrew, litrom, to donate. B'safa hamikra'it, in the biblical language, shoresh hamila truma, the root of the word truma, is not taram, but rather rom or ram. You might know that if you go or your kids went to a camp in the summer. Camp Ramah. What is a Ramah? A high place. What does the modern Hebrew verb leharim mean? To raise or to lift. According to Rabbi Eli, the root of truma is not ta-ra-ma, taram, but ha-rama, to raise. This is not a donation, this is an elevation. Vetsurat hapoel, the infinitive, be'ivrit mikra'it, in biblical Hebrew, eina litrom, is not litrom as it is in modern Hebrew, thank you Eliezer ben Yehuda, ki'im leharim, but rather to raise. Kishem shahadavar shehunaf nikra tnufa, just like something that is waved, hunaf, from the verb lahanif, is called tinufa. The tuf comes in there in the structure of the word, not in the root. V'davar shehukam, something which is erected, from the verb lahakim, nikra tikuma, is called tikuma. Again, the tuf appears in the word, but it's not part of the root. Hadavar shehuram nikra truma. Something which is raised up is called a truma. Before we read the rest of what Rabbi Ofran says, how might it change our understanding of that scene then, what God was asking the Israelites to do, and what we are doing when we are giving a donation now, to understand that the root is not the root to donate, but the root to elevate or to raise? It would inspire you to give a hell of a lot more? Yes. Because otherwise you're not really raising the bar, as it were? Okay, someone else? Yeah, Rabbi? Aha. So if I have to donate, maybe I'll donate the least of what I have. If built into the structure of the notion of donation is elevation, it might push me to give on a higher level from the best of what I have. Yeah. Reminding you of the levels of tzedakah, the idea that if what I'm supposed to be experiencing, not to mention how I'm supposed to be influencing the world, but experiencing, I'm the one doing the verb. If the thing I'm supposed to be experiencing is an ascent, then I can't do it in a begrudging way. I can't do it in a resisting way. I have to do it in such a way that my experience is one of ascent, and maybe the experience of those around me is one of ascent. Was there someone over here too? Rebecca? Yeah. Oh, lovely. Lovely. Right? So it's not just the experience of the giver, but of the given. It's as if like, it's as if monetary material in my own ownership itself experiences an elevation as soon as it is part of a truma. It is literally the truma. Look where he goes from here. Because we're only halfway through his insight. B'chibor halashoni, in the linguistic connection, shebein pulat harama, between the action of the lifting up, the raising up, uvein netinat hachuma, and the giving of the truma, which was what was being obligated in that verse, mikupelet mashma'ut amuka. There is folded into that a deep meaning, a deep insight. HaTorah matziga et maseh truma. The Torah presents the action of truma. I'm not going to define it as donation. I'm just going to define it as truma. Kindetina kilapei mala, as a giving that is directed upwards. It's built into the letters of the word. Bidiyuk hafuch. That's exactly the opposite. Mehaofen shabo regilim b'nei adam litrom b'derech klal. That's the opposite of the stance that most of us take consciously or unconsciously when we are giving donations. When we are giving donations, for the most part, we are giving it because we feel that we are up and the recipient is down. That's why we're giving it. When we give one-to-one, we pass by someone on the street who is indigent, who's suffering. Our experience is, I am not suffering this moment. I'm in a high place. And so even if I don't, it's not that I'm deigning to do it. I'm not like throwing down coins at someone in a begrudging way, but I'm giving from the up to the down. That's the experience of much of giving. And even if you're giving not to an indigent person, but you're giving to an institution that is in need, your individual sense of that moment is, I am well enough, I have extra, that's high. This institution to which I'm giving, or this organization, this cause, it has lack, that's low. I give from the high to the low. Look what he says. Milmala lamata. Normally we're giving from up to down. Miyado shel ha'ashir, from the hand of the wealthy, el zo shel ha'ani, to the hand of the poor. Meiram hama'ala, from an exalted height, el habazui v'hashafel, to the one which is degraded and contemptible and low. If we search ourselves, this is not a bad thing, it's just a thing. If we search ourselves, a lot of the ways in which we interact in moments where we are being asked to give or feel moved to give is because we have an experience of momentary excess, of momentary height, maybe even momentary superiority, not moral superiority, but just being in a superior zone, and therefore we have what to give to a one or to a thing that has lack and that is an inferior zone. The good part about this is that we can understand when we have extra and we can cause ourselves to part with it. That's the strength of it. The weakness of it, I think is what he's implying here, is that it relies on your having that emotional experience of empathy and pity. And if you lack that emotional experience in that moment, you might not choose to give. You might not choose to extend yourself. Emotions are fleeting, and they cannot be legislated. And if our being asked to give is reliant on our feeling the need to give from the high to the low, then it is susceptible to the fleeting nature of our feelings. But if the reason why we're giving is not because we're giving from high to low, but by in the giving itself, we are in the process of raising ourselves and the thing being raised in the society around us, that's no longer reliant on how we feel about the individual or the cause in our presence. It's reliant on our understanding about something cyclical in the nature of all giving and all receiving. Turn the page. We all know this poem. It's an extraordinary poem. I've quoted here the part that is most commonly discussed. And it's a poem on which the late 19th, early 20th century story of the United States was built around. And thank goodness for it. But if you listen to this poem in contrast to Rabbi Ofran's understanding of the different ways of giving, maybe we recognize something that is lacking in this being the only way that we relate to those who are in need in the moment. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. It's such evocative English. It so describes the experience of those who came so vulnerably to our shores then and now. The reason why this poem works is because it speaks to our conscience. It speaks to our sense that, yes, since they are wretched and they are refuse and they're teeming at our shore, we're obligated to do something for them because we are not wretched, and we are not refuse. We are not garbage. And therefore, we have something to give to them. But the moment you stop being able to experience and feel all those people who are choosing to come as deserving of your pity, either because you have fears, real, deserved, or undeserved, about what might happen, then the equation in this poem breaks down, and the individual and the society's urge to give breaks down as well. If you think about truma and the whole notion of giving as an elevation, it's not reliant on that emotion that can disappear. It's very interesting what I don't know if it was actually Eliezer ben Yehuda who did it, but by creating the modern verb litrom, the modern Hebraicists changed and I think denuded the notion of giving from what it originally was intended with the biblical language. The biblical intention of this entire concept was a lifting up. It was turned into an anodyne verb to donate. I don't even know what the English etymology of donation is, but I don't think it's something that's particularly exalted. Right? Look at source 6. I'm not sure if you've thought much about why it is an Yamim Noraim we have a circular challah rather than a braided one, and there are innumerable explanations as to why. But this is Shemen HaTova's collection of Hasidic writings by Rabbi Shmelki of Nikolsburg and his brother, Rabbi Pinchas Halevi Horowitz, and look at their description as to why we have the circular challah. In truth, however, our fortune is similar to a wheel. Just as a wheel turns, one's fortune may go up or down, for everything is in the hands of God. For the moment, read through this commentary, putting aside, even though it's very significant to them, the deterministic theology of this sentence, of this commentary, and just focus on the circularity and the vulnerability of every moment, because we don't know when we're going to be up or we're going to be down. The Rosh Hashanah bread, symbolizing all our sustenance for the coming year, is shaped like a wheel to remind us that who rises and who falls on the wheel of fortune is decided by God alone. Again, putting aside the theological determinism here, his understanding, or their understanding, of why we begin the year with a circular challah is so that we know very clearly that however high we think we are in this moment as our year is beginning, we have no idea what the year is going to bring. We don't know when we're going to be high and we're going to be low. We're not going to know when we are on the receiving end or the giving end. We don't know where we're going to be on this circle that constantly folds back in itself. And to recognize that however high you are now, there is a susceptibility and a vulnerability to you individually, or you as a nation, or you as a community needing to be on the receiving end. That is the type of humility that should inspire someone to give a truma, not out of pity, but out of a recognition that society needs there to be givers, because there will always be receivers. Look at source 7. This is the prayer that the Kohen Gadol would say as he would walk out of the Kodesh Kodashim on Yom Kippur, and it is included in most versions of the Avodah service in the Machzor. And it's a wonderful acrostic, and I pick up just at the shins, because look what happens when we get to the shins. If you go through it, there was a bet, a gimel, a daled, a hey, a bracha for every letter. But when the author got to the taf at the end of the shin, he added a few. So the Kohen Gadol would ask for Shnat Shalom V'Shalva, a year of peace and tranquility. Shana Shetolichenu Kumiyut Li'artzeinu, a year in which we will be brought up upright to our land. That's the taf. That's the last letter of Tolichenu. Another taf, Shana Shelo Tapil. That's the taf. A year in which Shelo Tapil Isha at Pre-Bitna. A year in which no women will suffer a miscarriage. Another taf, Shnat Ta'aleinu. Ta'aleinu smechim le'artzeinu, that you bring us up to our land in joy. And look at how this prayer of the Kohen Gadol ends. And if we can imagine the author who created this prayer having the Kohen, in addition to the acrostic, end with the prayer, the hope, having to do with our greatest fear, our greatest vulnerability. Shana shelo yitztarchu amcha beit Yisrael ze lezeh v'lo la'am acher. We are praying for a year in which your people Israel will not need to rely on so much help from one another, and certainly not from another nation. And the certainly not from another nation is because when we have to rely on the graces of another nation, it doesn't augur well for the future and the well-being of the Jewish people. B'titcha bracha b'maseh dehem. God, give them a blessing. Give them of your manifold blessings so that we're not reliant on others. The fact that this is written into the liturgy suggests this was a terrible fear. It was a terrible fear that the Jewish people were going to be coming to celebrate their new year, and in that year, they were going to be the ones on the dole. They were going to be the ones indigent. They were going to be the ones relying on the pity of others. And when you're relying on the pity of others, you'll be taken care of as long as they have pity on you. But if they don't have pity on you, you're exposed and you're vulnerable. I want to suggest that what this might bring to this conversation, because we're doing this somewhat tangentially, it is okay and a beautiful thing to give of your time and your resources and your hospitality because you have compassion. Sure. Because you're a person of empathy. Sure. It is a good human and Jewish desire to recognize when you have to act out your compassion to one who has less. But there's a greater cycle going on, and it's hinted at in the root itself. One of the reasons that we give and that we open and that we welcome and that we offer, because right now we can. But in the past, we've not been able to. And in the future, we have no idea if we will be able to. And we need to contribute to a society that recognizes the roundness of that challah, where giving and offering and welcoming and inviting is seen as an act of elevation, not reliant on how I feel about you, the recipient, right now, but how I view my own position, not in the daily cycle, the monthly cycle, but the millennial cycle of ups and downs, of people's fortunes, and nations' vulnerabilities, and countries' strengths and weaknesses. We welcome the stranger, yes, because we were strangers then, and we might be in the future, and it's our obligation to construct a society where a stranger is embraced and a stranger is given home, because we will certainly want that and need that when it's our turn.
You've been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast website or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information on Temple Beth Am, Los Angeles, go to www.tbala.org.